My name is Koller. I teach here at Drisha, including a new class starting next week on recently found inscriptions and what they can teach us about Tanakh. For this week's Parashat Va'eira, I'd like to focus on some other things that we know about the ancient world, not recently found, but things we've known for a long time, and particularly about ancient Egypt. Obviously, this Parasha has a lot to say about ancient Egypt, and I'd like to think for a second about the plagues, the Makot. Tzioni Zevit of the University of Judaism wrote a nice article a few years ago outlining different ways to think about the plagues. One way to think about them is about undoing creation. Numerous Makot, numerous plagues seem to reverse the process of creation that we read about back in Bereshit Perek Aleph. Another way of looking at them is as natural catastrophes, which happen to be perfectly timed to get the Israelites out of Egypt, but that the events themselves could be natural events. And of course, for a theology such as the Rambam's, who likes to think of miracles as exactly that, natural events with impeccable timing, that's an attractive way of looking at the Makot. But another way of looking at the plagues is as specifically targeting Egypt, and most especially Egyptian theology. Now, the first thing to say is that it has to be that the plagues are told with particular goals in mind. And that's because we see even in Tanakh two other ways of telling about the plagues, two other ways of listing the plagues that happened in Egypt in Psalm 78 and 105. And there, first of all, there are only 7 plagues each, and they're in different orders with presumably different significances. The number 7 is obviously an important number, but in Shemot we read of 10. And of course the Rishonim already observed that the 10 is broken up into 3 groups of 3 each, with one culminating plague, the death of the firstborn. But the way that the plagues are told, the way that they're narrated, is clearly meant to convey certain messages and certain ideologies. So a couple of details in the plague narrative make us think especially of ancient Egyptian ideology, imagery, and ways in which Hashem, God, in the plague narrative, is combating that. So to take a simple example at first, God says He's going to make Paro's heart heavy, kaved. He says it a number of times. We know from ancient Egypt that a heavy heart was the worst fate someone could suffer. When someone died, their heart would be weighed on a balance scale against a feather. And if the heart was found to be heavier than the feather, that person was condemned to have no afterlife in the land to which he had been hoping to go. If the heart was found to be as light as a feather, then he could proceed to the afterlife. When God says He's making Paro's heart heavy, He's clearly saying He's going to make He's going to make Paro into a guilty person. He's going to reveal his guilt and thereby condemn him to a lack of an afterlife. One other example is the plague of Choshech, plague of darkness. Although the first plague, Dam, and then the next couple as well, target the Nile River, the Nile was actually not a major god in Egyptian theology. It's odd because the Nile played such a central role in their lives, but it didn't have a major theological role to play. It was explained as part of a different god, Osiris, let's say. But the sun god was by far the most powerful god, and that was represented by Ra. Ra was the god of the sun, and Aten was the sun disk itself. Just a couple of generations earlier than Yetziat Mitzrayim, under the heretic king Akhenaten, worship of any other god was outlawed in ancient Egypt, with the exception of Aten, of the sun disk itself. When Hashem, God of Israel, darkens the land, blots out the sun in the penultimate plague, in the 9th plague, that seems like a clear battle against the belief in the power of Aten or the power of Ra. These Egyptian gods have no power when it comes to fighting against the God of Israel, when it comes to fighting against Hashem. Finally, the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, might not be a fight against any particular Egyptian god, but actually the fulfillment of an Egyptian prophecy. Egyptian texts from 1,000 years earlier than Yetziat Mitzrayim, from about 23 or 2400 BCE, in the coffin texts, tell of a terrible day that was to come, when the one whose name is not known will kill all the firstborn kids. Now that sounds like a remarkable parallel, a remarkable precedent for the death of the firstborn. And Hashem, in the book of Shemot, in the plague narrative here in Exodus, might be saying, in other words, I am that person, I am that figure whose name was not known. Remember what he says to Moshe, I am Hashem. I appeared to earlier ancestors, but Shmi Hashem lo nodati lahem. But I was not known by that name to them. I am that one whose name was not known, and here I am to kill the firstborns. The idea would be that even the Egyptians would understand the significance of this. They would see this as being prophesied in their own texts, as being the fulfillment of something they had long thought of and perhaps expected, here come to fruition at the hands of the God of Israel. The upshot of this in al regel achad, on one leg, is that it's critically important to understand as much as possible about the ancient world, to get as deep an understanding about Tanakh, about Chumash, in particular here about Yetziat Mitzrayim, about the Exodus, as possible. So I hope you'll join us for the class next week, where we will explore further examples of such study. Shabbat Shalom.